We'll be looking more into arrays soon because these are incredibly important, but just here we'll cover what they are just so we can get a brief introduction to them. So an array is, like I said a little bit earlier, a data type that allows for multiple values to be stored within one value. So that might sound a little bit complicated, but actually these are pretty easy to get going with. Now, these different values can be mixed data types as well. So you can store a string, an integer, and a float, and a boolean if you like, inside of an array. Now, the purpose of an array is being able to store multiple values so you don't have to create variables for each value. It just kind of tidies things up, and later on it allows you to iterate over these values, which is very, very powerful, and allows you to count them, add them, whatever you want to do. So let's take a look at a basic array. So let's say a list of different names. Now in this case, what we might do is say names1 and then go ahead and give a name. We might then say names2 and then go ahead and give another name. But of course you don't want to be doing this. You want it to be conveniently stored in one value. So we're going to create one variable called names. And here we can do a couple of things. We can either use the array keyword, or we can go ahead and use 2 square brackets. Now this is the preferred way. It's much nicer, much cleaner, easier to type. So I would always recommend you do this, and I'm going to be doing this throughout the series. So inside of here then, what we would do is just define out the value, as we've already seen, any kind of data type. So we could have numbers in here as well. We could have variables like different variable types or different data types like booleans. But in this case, we know that a name is just a string. So here are 3 names separated by commas inside of an array. Okay, so let's just take a look at how we echo this out. Now this isn't going to work, so let's take a look at what we get over in the browser. So we have array. More importantly down here, this is the kind of array trying to be echoed out, which hasn't worked. It's just given us that array keyword. And here we have a notice, array to string conversion. We can't, at least very easily, just say output all of these values. It's a kind of different data type. It's not a string, it's not a number. So we're not seeing that just output to the screen. So the question is then, how do we access the values in an array? Well, earlier we saw var dump. Now this isn't how we access values in an array, but this is how we can see the values inside of an array so we know how to work with them. So let's go ahead and do a var dump on names, come over to the browser and give that a refresh. So this might look a little bit more complicated, but essentially all we're saying here, or all PHP is saying, is that we have an array with 3 items in it. Let me make that a little bigger. Then the first item, which we denote with a 0, because this is called a 0 indexed array. So basically any array that we use will always start with a 0. So the first value is a string of 4 characters. That's what this value here means. And that's of course Alex. The next one, which is 1, because it's 1 of 0, is a string with 5 characters. And the third one, which is denoted by 2, is a string with 4 characters. And that is pretty much it. So we've seen how we go ahead and inspect the contents of an array. We know that there are strings in there. If, for example, we did have an integer in there, you can see that we have an int of 7. So this is just the value. Okay, so now that we have var dumped this out and seen exactly what's inside of here, how do we drill down into this and pick out a particular item? Now, let's say just very simply, you wanted to output the first name in this list. Well, let's go ahead and echo names. Now, we've already done this and we know that it doesn't work, but what we can now do is using square brackets again, directly after the variable name that the array is stored in, we can give that index. Now, remember the index is 0, then it's 1, then it's 2. So this is 0, this is 1, and this is 2. So if we echo out names at position 0, we get the value Alex. If we do the same thing at 1, you probably guessed we get Billy. And again, if you do 2, which is the third one, you get Dale. Now, if you were to try and access one that didn't exist, you see we get an undefined offset. So this is the offset of the index that we're trying to access, and it's undefined because there is no value at position 3. We only have them at 0, 1, and 2. So we can do loads of other things with arrays. We can loop through them to access each value within a loop, but we'll be looking at that later when we look at loops. Now, what happens if I wanted to add an item to this array somewhere else in my code? So for example, we may have an if statement where if something evaluates to true, we want to add a new name to this list. Well, let's just take a look at how we would do that. So we're going to say names. We're not going to provide anything within these square brackets here, but what we are going to do is assign a new value to this. Now, it's really important that we use these because this means that what we're doing is we're adding a new value onto this. So for example, let's go ahead and add on Josh to this array. Now again, we can do a var dump very quickly just to see the contents of this array. And of course, now we see that we have an additional value stored in here at index 3. So now if we wanted to, we could echo names at index 3 and we see that value in there. Okay, so I think that's pretty much it for arrays. This has been the very basics of arrays, but like I said, we're going to cover these in a lot more detail soon. So now that we've finished this section on data types, these are the main ones that you're going to be using a lot. We will dive into the other data types that we spoke about, but for now, this is pretty much all you need to start working with the most basic PHP data types and how you're going to build up most of your applications.